Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. Today is Sunday, April 19th, 2026. And today we have a fascinating conversation in store for you with one of our allies from the U.S. Pirate Party. You may recall that in 2025, we entered into a political coalition with the U.S. Pirate Party entitled All Hands for a Free Future. And one of the aspects of that coalition, which has been and is going to continue to be greatly helpful to both of our parties for expanding our reach, is a cross-endorsement process for candidates running for office in various jurisdictions. And today, we have an opportunity to speak with such a candidate from our allied political party. First, I would like to introduce our panel. Joining us is our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia. Also joining us is our Director of Community and Citizen Science, Daniel Tweed, who is also a frequent candidate for office. He was our 2024 endorsed U.S. vice presidential candidate, and he ran on 4 occasions for city council in Thousand Oaks, California. And he also served briefly on the Council on Aging in Thousand Oaks, California. But our special guest today is Blase Henry. Blase is a pirate in Arizona. He's the captain of the Arizona Pirate Party, and he is the scribe, which is the equivalent of the secretary of the United States Pirate Party. And he is currently campaigning to become one of the 2 representatives for Arizona's Legislative District 17. He is officially running as an independent candidate, but the Pirate Party has, of course, endorsed him. And he's here to tell us about his background, how he got involved in pirate politics, as well as what has happened with his campaign thus far. So, Blase, welcome. It's great to have you with us. Please tell us more.
Thank you for giving me the chance to be on here, Gennady. It's been wonderful. As Gennady said, my name is Blase Henry. I'm the captain of the Arizona Pirate Party and the scribe of the United States Pirate Party. I joined the Pirate Party back in April of last year, so it would be a full year I've been a pirate. So it's been great. I joined the Pirate Party to not necessarily be the captain or lead, but to just simply be a pirate, just to be a part of it, because I didn't anticipate leading or being the captain. But I came to the realization when I tried to find anyone who's from Arizona who's a pirate, there was no one. I was the only Arizonan pirate. So, in my opinion, with that realization that if it's only me and it's not me, then who, you know? If it's only you, if it's not you, then who? You know, who else would take the reins of being the pirate, running the Arizona Pirate Party? So I rose my hand and say, you know what? I will lead the Arizona Pirate Party. I will do what I can to create the Arizona Pirate Party and grow the Pirate Party here in Arizona to the point where it can, self-sustain without any sort of help, where I have to prop it up, so to speak. And in the past year or so, our party in Arizona has grown exponentially. We've grown in members. We've become a state voting member with with the United States Pirate Party. We actually recently just had our election for this year for 26 to 27 of the Arizona Pirate Party. We've accumulated 2 new members, one for our web admin and one for our PR and media director. And it's been going swimmingly so far. We plan to grow exponentially more this year. We plan to attend events. We plan to host events. We plan to do some community work as well. We actually do plan on hosting a food drive called Plunder Hunger. We don't have a specific date established yet, unfortunately, because we're still struggling to find a permanent place for our food drive boxes. But once we find at least one place, probably a library, where we can have that food drive box, we will start the food drive immediately and we'll go on for a month. That's just one example. And all of these ideas and events are in the goal of growing our party even more to the point where we can get our party on the ballot for 2028. Because in Arizona, it's one of the hardest states to get a party on the ballot. You need like 34,100 or so signatures in total. And if I remember correctly, they can't all be in one place. Like you can't go to Tucson or Phoenix and gather a whole bunch of signatures in one place. You need to spread it around across multiple counties, and they need to match a certain percentage, which I believe is 10% in each of those counties, which is heavily hard to do for such a small party, which is why we need to grow as much as we can so that we can have less of a hard time getting those signatures, because we know that not every signature is going to be valid. They're going to be, it can't be like 34,000. We need to adjust for that time and have like 38,000 or something like that, in case for officials to say, no, this ain't right, you need more signatures or something like that. And this also goes into my campaign, because I started this campaign in the hopes of the realization that, okay, we don't have the manpower resources to get our party on the ballot this year, so let's punt for 28 and decide that run as an independent candidate and get enough outreach, exposure, so enough about the Pirate Party to other people that when we're ready to launch our party to get on the ballot for 28, we'll have enough to be able to get on the ballot and won't have to struggle as much. My campaign did struggle a lot in late 25, because I wasn't able to get out as much as I could. But at the beginning of the year, I had a team of at least 6, including me, who are committed to gathering signatures, because originally the original signature requirement to get an independent on the ballot is 1,677 signatures, which is a very steep hill to climb to begin with, but it was manageable so long as we committed to at least 20 signatures a day. But like, I can't remember when this was in March, but it was sometime in March when I received an email from the state said the signature requirements increased 200 signatures, which meant that the 1,677 signatures increased to 1,878 signatures, which made it a whole lot more difficult to get those signatures, and which kind of took a lot of the wind out of our sails, no pun intended, of course. And at the same time, the team of 6 I mentioned, it all fell apart by February. People, said that they couldn't commit anymore, which is fine. Things happen. Some people said, oh, I can't do this anymore for another reason. or just went AWOL, and just ghosted. I don't know why. I can't understand why, but sometimes that happens, and it just fell apart, and it was only me. And I was only able to get 333 signatures by myself in that time. And the worst part is that the original deadline for the signature requirement was April 6th, but in April and February, actually, you know what? I think the signature requirement increased in February, and uh, the deadline also was moved up 2 weeks earlier, and I got that notice in February, where instead of April 6th, it went to March 23rd. So they not only increased the signature requirement, they also, moved up the deadline 2 weeks. So so the state deliberately made it more difficult for people who are getting signatures to get on the ballot through that, which unfortunately I did not meet, and now I'm forced to be a write-in candidate for this election and for legislative district 17 to be a representative.
Yes, thank you, Blase, for that overview. And indeed, it's an unfortunate situation that you got hit with two adverse changes in the criteria during the middle of the campaign season. So the signature requirements increased from 1677 to 1878. And the deadline for collecting those signatures changed from April 6th to March 23rd. Now, it seems highly unusual, in my view, that this change could take place midstream, that they would drop it on you so suddenly. Usually, those kinds of changes would require an act of the legislature, and then there would be an effective date that would essentially take place in a subsequent campaign season before the next campaign season, not retroactively affect something that has already started. So what justification did they use? I'm just a bit perplexed that this happened. What did
If
they
I re-
say?
if I remember correctly, if I remember the email correctly, it was an act of legislature. I can't remember the specific act they had or that was referenced in the email, but if I remember correctly, it was an act of legislature.
Interesting that they would have an effective date so soon after the passage of that act of the legislature. But we have a comment here from Guildsman Pirate, just a classic example of them rigging the game against independents and minor parties. And yes, I would echo that. This is a situation where perhaps they see a candidate who is likely to make it through, even though the existing rules were stringent, but that candidate had a fighting chance, and maybe they saw that about you, Blase. Maybe they saw that about someone else from another minor party, but they decided to raise the bar in very short order without really giving you an opportunity to effectively respond or adjust your campaign approach. Future.org writes, the two major parties can always work together when it comes to other parties trying to get on the ballot. So I'm curious about this legislative change. Was it enacted unanimously by the legislature in Arizona? Did it have bipartisan support?
I'm going to be honest, I really don't know what the vote count was. I will need to check again with the email and see what the act was and check on the votes and stuff like that just to see what the vote count was. But if I can make an educated guess, it was probably unanimous.
Interesting. Well, thank you. And yes, I would just be curious to learn more, because to me that seems egregious that they changed the rules on you midstream. And it doesn't seem like there was much of an opportunity to debate that piece of legislation or contest it. But tell us more about the process of gathering petition signatures in Arizona? Because my understanding is Arizona is unique among the states in that it actually allows a portion of the signatures to be gathered electronically. 50% of the signatures may be gathered in that way, if I recall correctly.
Yes, that is true. It's called equal. Candidates can use electronic through online means. If you go to my candidate website, there's the old sign the petition signature red button on that site, where if you click on it, you can go exactly to the equal. The thing is, you need to be within that district. Like you have to be within District 17 in order to sign it. Like it can't be anyone from Arizona to sign it. My former my former first officer tried that, and it's like, no, it can't be. It can't be just anyone from Arizona. It has to be in the district. If I was running for governor, for example, that wouldn't be a problem. But since I was running for district, a specific district, it would have to be someone. You would have to live in that district. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. And you can also collect signatures the old ways, through the old way. And that's been my main way of collecting signatures, because collecting them at like places like the library or any sort of public places such as the library is a very good way of collecting signatures. Because at one point I was able to get like the most I've ever collected was 33 signatures in one day. So it's a very viable way of collecting signatures, and if you have a team of being able to do that every single day, you can definitely get on the ballot. It's just a matter of putting in the work, putting in the effort, and you can get there. It's just, things happen, winds take out of your sails, teams fall apart, unfortunate events may happen that takes your time away. You can't always account for that, unfortunately.
And I would say, just to interject briefly, 333 signatures that you gathered by yourself, that's quite impressive. It would have taken a lot of work to do that, but please continue.
It was a lot of work. I felt like I could have done more at the same time, but I'm not going to sit here and judge myself for not getting more at the same time. And to speak on the signatures for getting a state party on the ballot, it's a completely different ball game. It cannot be used through equal. It cannot be used electronically. It has to be in person. There's no other exception. That's another reason why we're trying to grow as much as we can, so we can have that in-person effect, because we cannot rely on electronic signatures because they won't allow us to do that.
Yes, so that is unfortunate that the opportunities for using electronic signatures are so limited, because there are so many advantages for electronic signatures, provided, of course, that you can have a system where you verify somebody's identity and residency, but that can be done. If the DMV can do it, then the state election system can do it.
If I may interject, they can do that, because when you go on the equal, they require you to show your ID or something like that, like voter ID or something, to show that yes, you live in that district. So there's no reason to not use equal for getting state parties on the ballot. They just don't want to. They just want you to go through the old ways, because they want state parties. They want to control as many state parties in the state as possible.
Yes, there are definitely more friction points involved in in-person signature gathering. You have to approach essentially random people whom you most likely don't know, whose daily plans you don't know, and they may be intending to do something else that day. And here you are trying to talk to them, trying to persuade them to sign a petition. And I'm curious, how receptive have people been when you approached people? were the majority of them at least willing to give you a chance, at least willing to consider what you had to say, consider your request to sign the petition, or were there a lot of people who were just not interested or hostile? What was your experience?
I mean, yes, there's always going to be when those sorts of people who are going to be, hostile and not like want your time of day and stuff like that when they're trying to go to one place or another. But at the same time, in my experience collecting signatures, it was pretty easy and more friendly than I anticipated because at first you obviously have all the anxious nerves and everything. Oh, like you're so nervous, you gotta have to stand out there and have to ask for signatures and all that. It gets very borderline scary. But once you get through the first few people, it gets a whole lot easier to ask for signatures because that sort of anxious fear goes away, and you're like, oh yeah, I can. You feel like, oh yeah, I can do this, this is not an issue, this is not a problem. So for example, when I went out there at the local library, my general ask was like, hello sir, how are you doing today, and would you mind adding your signature to our petition? And then I would explain myself and said, I'm running as an independent for Legislative District 17 to be a state representative, and I'm collecting signatures to be on the ballot. That's really all there is. And to it, sometimes they ask for more information. Sometimes they might ask for any sort of like media that you might have, like a pamphlet. But most of the time, they're like, okay, yeah, I'll sign that signature because like, okay, I'll give you a chance. I'll give you something. If I was like running as a Democrat or a Republican, it will be a different story. They might be more hostile. But since I was running as an independent, they were much more willing to give my signature. And it also helps that in the district I live in, there's a whole lot of independents living in here. So it's a very easy way to acquire signatures that way because a lot of independents are like, yeah, I don't like the two-party system either. This is the reason I'm an independent. I want to give independents a chance. Oh, this is an independent. I'm going to give this signature to this guy and hopefully he can run and represent me.
Yes. Well, I'm glad to hear that, first of all, there are a lot of independents in your district. Second, that your observation is people are generally willing to give independents a chance. And that resonates with my experience. I think most ordinary voters whom you encounter day to day, they will say that they too are fed up with the two-party system. They too are fed up with how the system is being manipulated and distorted by special interests rigging the rules in their favor. And it seems that if one has determination, if one has a good organization on the ground, it's possible to overcome some of these barriers. But then, of course, the issue with the duopoly is that it will keep raising the bar. And that is a problem. Now, Daniel Tweed has an interesting comment in our chat. He writes, Arizona has as its state planet Pluto, discovered from the Arizona Lowell Observatory. Pluto has also had its planet status wrongfully challenged by the establishment, as they seek to do to candidates and parties. And I agree with that. Pluto is a planet. It should be recognized as a planet. They now call it a dwarf planet, but there is that term planet in there. So how is a dwarf planet not a planet? And if they're concerned that there are other dwarf planets as well, make them recognized as planets also. But Daniel also writes, talking to members of the public can actually be quite fun and interesting. So Daniel, you've had that experience. Of course, you've had to gather some petition signatures for your city council runs. So tell us more about that. And do you have any questions to ask Blase about his experience?
Oh, sorry, I was watching on a delayed feed because of the YouTube delay. Um, did you still want me to address
Yes.
that?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Um, yeah, it's a little easier in Thousand Oaks City Council because you only need 25 valid registered voters who reside in Thousand Oaks to get on the ballot, and then they say, well, you should probably collect 35 to make up for any invalids, as you spoke about having a margin of safety there. But yeah, it's a good experience. I think as I just commented, independence is in the heart and soul of the American DNA. That's how we became a country. Had an independent streak from the mother country. So I think you do find a lot of people that are willing to reach out to independent actors in the political arena, and yeah, I would recommend it for people just to exercise their independence and their freedom, and to meet their fellow community members as well. And we don't have a political system that is by any means optimized. I think people realize that there's a lot of room for improvement in how we do policy governance. So anyway, just want to say ahoy matey, go pirates, and go independence.
Indeed. Thank you, Daniel. And in terms of the difficulties that you faced, Blase, Guildsman Pirate writes, I suppose at best you could have sued, but for 2 weeks and 200 more signatures, I think he meant to say, they may have easily thrown that out. It would have been a waste of time and resources. And I think that might have been part of the motivation for how that rule change was configured. They could have argued that, oh, well, these changes to the criteria, they're not too onerous. Getting 200 signatures, that's doable, and getting them a little bit sooner, that's doable as well. So we're not really inconveniencing anybody. But of course, if it's just you collecting signatures or you and a few people, that's a huge added burden. And it's unfortunate that they got away with it. But I would like to ask you more about your plans to be a write-in candidate. So Arizona has this strange system where even write-in candidates need to officially register as such. Otherwise, if someone writes in their name on the ballot, it won't be counted in the final results. And to me, that's another egregious kind of requirement, because the whole point of writing someone in is that one is dissatisfied with all of the official options on the ballot and one wishes to express a preference for a different candidate. So tell us more about how this write-in candidate registration works in Arizona, what is involved in terms of the criteria, and how you're planning to pursue that.
I will be perfectly honest. I haven't pursued as much in the write-in registration as possible, even though I am going to do that since we have some time with this and we're trying to allocate our resources to see how we go around doing that. Because most of my time in the past 2 months has been party building with Arizona more than focusing on my write-in campaign. That said, if I remember correctly, the registering for a write-in campaign is like registering for any sort of candidate for like independent or Democrat or Republican or whatsoever, and it has to be go through the state and stuff like that. I can't remember what the site's called, but it has to go through the state, and there's actually a pretty seamless system to do that, and it's pretty easy. But at the same time, the fact that we need to write in, have it registered, is ridiculous in itself. But yeah, that's where we're at. I don't anticipate, uh, doing. I don't anticipate this write-in campaign to do a whole lot of noise outside of more outreach, more exposure, more experience for our party so that we can get on the ballot for 28. Because if we do get on the ballot for 28, the signature requirement for new parties is significantly low. Like, for example, Libertarians or the Greens or the New Labels, which is the independent candidate, I think now, their signature requirements is like 60 signatures in total or something like that. So that's why it's so important to get on the ballot, because if we can do that, we don't need to worry about those high signature requirements. That said, someone has to run for governor, each year and get a certain percentage. Otherwise, we'll lose that status, which is like, a part of the problem. But we'll figure it out.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's interesting because, yes, if a party qualifies for ballot access, then to keep that fresh, so to speak, requires fewer signatures than meeting that initial burden to qualify. There is a page of information on write-in candidates, and this is from Pima County in Arizona, the Pima County Recorder's Office on write-in candidates. And what this says is write-in candidates do not need to file nomination petitions. In Arizona law, a write-in candidate must file paperwork with the Secretary of State no later than 5 p.m. on the 40th day before the election, and only votes for registered write-in candidates will count. And they have a link to some additional resources on that page, but it does seem like you have time to pursue that process. And since you intend to do that, it means that you continue to campaign. And we've had email exchanges on this essentially per our cross-endorsement process for the All Hands for a Free Future political coalition with the U.S. Pirate Party. That means that we've had essentially an offer for an endorsement. You've accepted the endorsement, so you are now an endorsed candidate of the U.S. Transhumanist Party as well. So congratulations on that, Blase. And Mitch DeVilo, Guildsman Pirate, points out that you have a very fruitful party building effort in Arizona going on right now. So I would ask you to speak more to that. What are you doing to build up the Arizona Pirate Party, which, by the way, people can learn more about at azpirateparty.org. But tell us what this pirate party building in Arizona involves.
Well, most of our party building involves events, like going to events, like, for example, No King's Day. On No King's Day back on the 28th, I gave a speech there that you can watch on our channel at Arizona Pirate Party on YouTube. And events like that give us a chance to outreach to people who may be interested and be like, oh, this is cool, or inspire someone. Like, for example, one of our newest members watched my speech and was inspired enough to join the Pirate Party and also offer to make stickers for us. And it's not a lot. It may not be a lot to some people, but to us it means the world, because it means that more people coming in. It may not mean a lot. Again, it may not mean a lot to a lot of people. It means you have to start small and build. It can't be overnight, unfortunately, with party building, but with over time and with the work putting in, you can get there. And sometimes you got to take the initiative and do things, even if you may not feel like, oh, I may not be able to do this. Or, like, for example, we had a party rally back in March, on March 1st. I invited as many people as I could, but only 3 people showed up, including myself, and I was able to give a speech, and our Young Pirates USA representative for Arizona gave a speech as well. But the point is not like, oh, we didn't have a lot of people, that means it's not worth it. No, you do events like that so that set a certain standard of excellence, set a standard of, keep doing it. If you keep doing it, more people will show up, and eventually you'll have what you have, and have a better party, or stronger and healthier party. Because we have meetings every Wednesday at on our Discord at 8 p.m. Arizona time. Now everyone shows up, but every once in a while, sometimes they do show up, and that means the world. And it's all about keep setting those standards, keep communicating with others, because communication is very important to me. If you communicate with others, it keeps people in check, keep people in the loop. Because what I don't tolerate is people not communicating, people going ghosting or AWOL. That's something I do not tolerate in any sort of capacity, because to me it tells me that I cannot rely on you, and I do not want that, and I do not want any sort of nonsense like that. But as we continue on from that, we will not just attend events to further outreach. We will also host events as ourselves, such as the food drive we mentioned, and hopefully, and now this is just a thought that popped in my head, but potentially hosting a protest or two later down the road. That's like a thought in my head right now, so nothing concrete, but it's like that's just sort of an example of the sort of things we will do to continue building out and outreach and stuff like that. But at the same time, most of our efforts have been in Tucson, because I live in Tucson. Most of our members live in Tucson. The only pirate member we had was our former first officer, who goes by Citizen. And unfortunately, due to bandwidth issues, he can't be first officer until further notice, which is unfortunate, but hopefully he'll come back as soon as possible when that bandwidth issues are resolved. But that just goes to show that we can't exactly be a party of Arizona if we're only focused in Tucson. That's why in our bylaws we also have chapters for each county. Like, for example, Pima County Pirates, Maricopa County Pirates, Navajo County Pirates, and so on and so forth, to have a decentralized way of stability for our party, where I may not be, I don't have a jet in the back end of my pocket where I can just go to Flagstaff in 3 hours or something like that. I need to rely on other people around the state to build with us, to build, continue go forward with the party and build without having me to be there as well. And, help it be self-sustaining and stuff like that. Because right now we have like I have a lot of vacancies with our council board in the AZPP, but at least we have some members within the council that it gives people like, oh, this is people actually want to join this. This is something worth the time and stuff like that. And and there's a lot of vacancies with Pima County captains who are AKA chairs, and we want more people to fill those roles, to be able to organize county parties, parties for specific counties, so that we can further outreach, and I don't have to overextend my hand and overhandedly be centralized, because I don't want a centralized party, because we can't afford a centralized party right now.
Yes, thank you very much for laying out all of those party building efforts. You have a lot of good feedback in our YouTube chat. Guildsman Pirate writes, I believe it was Canadian philosopher Aubrey Graham who said, "It may not mean nothing to y'all, but understand nothing was done for me. Every little bit helps, and there's no effort that's for naught." Katie Clark writes, Blase, you don't need a jet in your back pocket. You need a full-fledged, land-capable pirate ship, mate. And she actually has a pirate flag in her comment on YouTube as well. So very good words. Thank you, Katie. And Futurizorg writes, I'll definitely be checking out that Discord. And they put in a smiley face. That's the Discord of the Arizona Pirate Party. The Reverend Truth Be Told writes, long live the Pirate Party. I'd like to make you some pirate hats by Chili Heads. Now, Chili Heads is a quite renowned brand. I remember even back in the 1990s, it was quite a well-known brand, but she owns Chili Heads, and that's quite a generous offer, I would say, to have pirate Chili Heads hats. And, well, it speaks to the importance of contributions from the community, the importance of volunteers, of supporters. People have also been making complimentary remarks about our U.S. Transhumanist Party pins, and we have our Zazzle store where 5 varieties of pins are available. So here's the link in our comments to the Zazzle store, but we have had several of our volunteers contribute designs, including Art Ramon, who is here, as well as Tom Ross, who designed this particular version of the USTP logo, the exponential infinity, the white on orange logo. And then Luis Arroyo as well, who is now the chairman of the New York Transhumanist Party, designed several of the other pins. And we welcome new designs, by the way. We've been thinking of having monthly new pin designs that would be added to the Zazzle store. I know Katie has an idea for a design, and we will happily entertain that one as well for inclusion. Now, I'm also interested in your thoughts on this comment from Kevin Bransaforti. He writes, it's my belief that this has less to do with keeping people off the ballot in terms of the criteria for the write-in candidates or the onerous signature requirements or shifting the deadlines, rather than keeping unwanted by the uniparty beliefs out of the conversation. It keeps the independents out of the debates. So he says the reason they don't want independent candidates to qualify for ballot access is that they don't want people to think that there is any alternative to the Republicans or the Democrats. Do you agree with that? And here's another question that may be interesting to consider. When you've had the opportunity to approach people to provide petition signatures, did you have any interesting conversations with some of these people that could have actually led them to think, oh, there are alternatives? There is somebody who is making sense, who is not a Republican or a Democrat, but who's trying to run for office.
I do think that I'm not gonna. I think it's both. I personally think it's both. I think it's both. They want to keep, the ballot access stringent and high, just because, but also because they want keep unwanted beliefs out of the party. Because unfortunately, there's always going to be the nutcases who run as independents who have no business, being a candidate. It's going to happen. It happens and stuff like that. So, that's like the devil's advocate, sort of thought process around that. So like, it is what it is on that, but at the same time, it's still gatekeeping. It's like you can't really, expect people to be okay with gatekeeping certain candidates just because you want the votes only for yourself. You just want power for yourself and stuff like that. And that's not healthy for any republic whatsoever. Trying to keep people off the ballot just for you to keep power to yourself is not healthy in any capacity. And to your question about healthy dialogues, it's been very healthy, I would say, because when I described the Pirate Party to many people, they're like, "Yeah, this sounds great. This sounds wonderful," and stuff like that. And like, I definitely can't disagree with any of that sort of mentalities, and that made things a lot easier to talk about and more talk about. And like, hey, if you're interested, you can join our Discord, go from there, and stuff like that, or give me your phone number and we can continue to talk past that. And we can mutually agree to get signatures for one another and support one another, because one of the first people who offered to collect signatures for us was actually trying to start a committee to try and get a ballot initiative for this year to get that age verification law overruled. And and I was invited to a meet with him, and we talked a lot about it. I gave him my signatures palettes, and he gave me mine, and we went from there and had a very healthy discussion. But at the same time, he quit that because he wanted to pursue like endorsing a candidate because he believed that getting that out was more important than anything else. And he wanted to put all his political efforts in that, which is fine. There's no loyalty, demands over my end. So I'm not gonna, cry over spilled milk with that. But it is what it is. But back to the conversation at hand, I've also reached out to the local Democrats for any sort of help in the district. And we had some, productive conversation with the table at the library I was collecting signatures with. Some, like good conversations with. And it was like, here's my contact information. Maybe you can work something out, because they were talking about how, because at the time when I was talking with them, they only had one Democrat running for that district. So it was mutually beneficial to have like an independent and a Democrat, and they would vote for the independent. So it was like a win-win sort of thing. But weeks later came the realization that they not only did not communicate, they not only did not contact me, but they also, someone else, run for a Democrat at the same time. So it was like, oh, okay, so that was a waste of time and stuff like that. And it's just like, okay, so I don't know, it's just frustration. You try to work across the aisle for like benefits, see, for mutual beneficial, and they're like, nope, never mind, screw you. And it's just frustrating.
Yes, that would be frustrating. And it's unfortunate that they treated you that way. Now, it's interesting, in response to some of the earlier tactics that were discussed, Guildsman Pirate wrote, dirty tactics won't get called such by dirty players, but it does seem like the duopoly resorts to dirty tactics quite often, even to the point where both Democrats and Republicans do this. They try to keep out parties and candidates that are actually more closely aligned to each of them, because in a first past the post plurality voting system, if the Democrats see someone who might, quote, take votes away from the Democratic candidate, they would rather get that person disqualified. That's why the Democrat establishment will often try to disqualify Green Party candidates, which our guest on March 29th, Pete Karras, who is running as a Secretary of State candidate in Wisconsin for the Green Party, discussed at considerable length. And the Republicans do the same as well. So if a Constitution Party candidate or, say, a right-leaning libertarian candidate tries to run, the Republican establishment will try to get that person disqualified. So I would say these are unprincipled tactics as well, because they should want those views represented, but they'd rather get that person thrown out. But what are your thoughts, Blase?
It's not just disqualification. They also they also want you to join them. Like, you're going to take away votes, so join us instead. Or form a block with the Democrats or form a block with Republicans, like some libertarians do, become like a faction within the party. And that's what I've been told multiple times. It's what's called entryism. Join the party, and try and, make the party, turn it into, something where your, opinions can be validated. The problem with that is that entryism just doesn't plainly work. It hasn't worked in over 100 years. Larger parties than us have tried and failed miserably, and we're no better off for trying to do entryism than if we try to, grow ourselves. And for what? For what purpose? Just to have just to be represent like a 1% faction and only have our opinions voiced for like 15 minutes, and then we're ignored for the rest of the time. And while they continue on with their status quo Democrat or Republican nonsense. No, it makes no sense. It genuinely makes no sense for any party to join any sort of, join the duopoly just to potentially have their voices heard, just to quote unquote win. Because because politics is more than just elections. Politics is more than just winning elections. It's about representing the people within, the district, within the people in this country. And you cannot do that if you're only focused about winning. I've had people come to me and it's like, you're going to take votes away from us, so join us instead. Form a block with us instead. I've had one person do that to me as well, and I was trying to be cordial with that person as well. And it was at a meeting, a local meeting within Tucson called Take Action Tucson. I don't remember the person's name. But afterwards, I was shaking hands with people. It's like, thank you for coming out here. And his constant response was don't take votes away from me. Don't cost me a president. Otherwise, I'm gonna come after you. I don't know how serious. Obviously, he was being half serious. But at the same time, the fact he said that says a lot. It's the sort of thing that grinds my gears, because we're at a critical point where the two-party system is not working, and yet you're worried about votes, stuff like that, taken away from you, when it's the world does not belong to you. You are not owed the world. None of this works like that. It doesn't work like that. And it just grinds my gears with those sort of people, because let's assume that ranked choice voting and proportional representation goes, elected in tomorrow. Let's say Congress okay, let's do that tomorrow. It's not a bunch of third parties are going to, sprung up like daisies in the spring, and a bunch of parties are, third parties are going to all of a sudden be represented. A lot of people in this country are still going to be Democrats and Republicans. We still have to put in the work to be a viable third party for people to vote for. That's why we can't just simply wait for a better time, or wait for, ranked choice voting or proportional representation like that, because the answer to that will be never. It can't be never. We have to put in the work to be viable third parties for people to vote for. Otherwise, we're not going to have any sort of chance whatsoever.
Yes, and I concur with your remarks. Of course, the U.S. Transhumanist Party has strongly supported both ranked choice voting and proportional representation. We have implemented ranked choice voting in our internal votes. But to your point, yes, just changing the rules in that regard isn't going to overnight change who the most influential political parties are, and the work on the ground to build the party organization, to get people informed, to get people involved, will still need to be done. I agree with you also about entryism not really being a viable strategy. A lot of people, especially people who come into politics with more idealistic motivations to improve the system or focus on policy rather than mudslinging or just undermining one's opponents, they think, well, they should be part of the system in order to change the system. But what they don't realize is the system is so much more powerful than they are when they try to play by the system's rules, because the insiders of the system have configured the rules to specifically favor certain outcomes that are more likely to arise in the status quo, and they will zealously guard those rules and those prerogatives against outsiders. So if you try to join the system to improve the system, then the question is, how long will you last within the system, or will you become disillusioned and give up? And if you don't give up, what adaptations will you need to take on in order to remain within the system? And over time, the unfortunate tendency is sometimes even the more idealistic politicians, not all of them, but I've certainly seen a few who have joined the system in order to change the system, become co-opted by the system. And they start playing within those rigged or unfortunate rules and engage in the same machinations, and they may justify those to themselves in some way by reference to some of their old ideals. But the fact is, when they do that, they perpetuate the system. So I agree that an approach to try to change the system from the outside is more viable because you can do it in a more principled manner. And as you pointed out, you can have great conversations, essentially the kinds that could shift public opinion, shift the discourse. And Guildsman Pirate writes, they, the representatives of the duopoly, say it as if their being there is the natural state, and anyone trying to participate in electoral politics outside of the duopoly is disruptive. So thank you for that comment. Now, Art Ramon, I'm curious if you have any questions for Blase before we move on to more of a policy conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. You were here in Tucson. I'm here in Tucson, so I'd like to go to one of your group meetings. I when I became the president of the Arizona Transhumanist Party, I tried to get some people, but it's very difficult. People didn't want to join, so I haven't done much recruiting. But I have worked in the past with like Grajala's campaign, like many years ago. So I saw how they did things. They threw a lot of pizza parties, and you feed the people. They'll go out and volunteer for you. They have a well-oiled machine. I think his daughter took over that machine now. But yeah, I'd like to give you some of what I saw. What works for them. I mean, they usually rent a space, every 2 years as their campaign headquarters. It always seems to change, and yeah, feeding the volunteers. I mean, that's a big one. You got to bring in the volunteers. They're hungry. Uh, I volunteered as a data entry person for I think 2 of the campaigns back in I must have been like 2010-ish, 2010. Yeah, I think it was 2010, 2008, somewhere around there. But yeah, I'd like to go to one of your meetings and talk.
Yes, that would be a great opportunity to have some in-person meetings between the Arizona Transhumanist Party and the Arizona Pirate Party. And if you could perhaps produce some minutes of those meetings or even a recording, that would be excellent as well, because I think great dialogue can be had, great opportunities for collaboration, exchanging your respective experiences with the political system, with campaigning in Arizona, could strengthen both of the parties at the state level. I think that's excellent. So thank you for that, Artramon. And Blase, if you have any thoughts, please go ahead.
I agree. We should definitely organize a time and date for us to meet together and hash out some sort of plan on outreach and stuff like that. A lot of people in the party would love to meet with the transhumanists here in Arizona.
Excellent. Excellent. And it looks like the 17th legislative district actually encompasses parts of Tucson, per my understanding. So there is physical proximity there. And we have a few comments from our audience before we move on to the policy discussion. Katie Clark writes, Blase, I would push back that it's not about winning at all. The fact that people believe this to be part of the equation is part of the problem. It's about service, being servants of the people first. She writes, the real question becomes, how do you best do that and what that looks like without a focus on winning? It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking you need to win to make change. That's not true. She writes, Gennady has changed me and many of the others, and he's never won a single elected position. He does so because he works as a servant of those he serves above all else, and we thank him deeply for it. So thank you very much, Katie, for those remarks. I'm honored, and I think she's right in that it's possible to make a difference without winning elected office. It's possible to make a difference just by being out there, by advocating for ideas, by having conversations, by getting people to think. And I think you've been doing that, Blase. So in the process of gathering, yes,
that's what I was trying to say. That's what I was
right.
trying to. She put it in better words than I did. I was trying to say they focused on winning when it's not about that. It's about, as she said, service. It's about representing. It's about all of that. Because again, politics is not about winning. It's about properly representing. Because a lot of in our history, in our past history, a lot of states didn't go to the Dems or reps. They sometimes went to a completely different person, like Teddy Roosevelt, for example. So it's not always about winning. It's not even about winning. Is the point I was trying to make. Maybe I didn't communicate very well on that. That's my fault. I take responsibility for that. But that's what I was trying to say.
Yes, I think the two of you are in agreement, actually. So thank you for that clarification. And Daniel Tweet writes, being on the winning side has never been a prerequisite for fighting for the good. You can continue in those efforts, whether or not you win an election. And again, just being out there spreading the message is extremely helpful. Kevin Bransaforti writes, Washington in 1796, George Washington that is, warned against the factions of political parties and how loyalism to faction would damage discourse. We need to speak with all seeking individual minds to lure them away from tribalism. So thank you for that comment. And now I think it's a good opportunity to transition to more of a policy conversation. And we have a question from the Futures Now Coalition. I'm brand new to the Pirate Party. What are some key issues and stances that make the U.S. Pirate Party different? So very open question. And Blase, I will let you take that in whatever way you would like. So when you talk about what makes the Pirate Party different, what issues do you emphasize? First, what would you say are your main issues?
Thank you. What I would focus on, whenever someone asks me about what the Pirate Party is about, or what makes us stand out from the other two parties, I pretty much give them this sort of speech. We believe in digital and intellectual reform, copyright reform, governmental transparency, and the protection of civil liberties and privacy. And we believe in an open and free society and putting people before corporations and government. Because to us, it's the people that comes first, not the government, not corporations. It's the people itself that's above all. And unfortunately, the two parties currently in power, the duopoly, they focus on one of the two. The Democrats focus on pro-government. Republicans focus on pro-corporations, but in this day and age, it's also pro-corporations and pro-government. But who's counting at this point with this administration? But that's pretty much the Pirate Party in a short nutshell. Obviously, we have a whole lot more policies than that. We're not just that, but that's our general quote-unquote sell. We also believe in cool and clean water as well, but also just water itself, because here in Arizona, water issues are completely imperative on top, at the top of issues to worry about. I'm sure you know that, Art, but that's to us is an imperative thing because houses are getting built and built and built and continue to develop in the area I live in, and I just keep looking at these houses being built, and I keep hearing the water shortages problem all in the news, and I just keep looking at these houses and I think, do we even have the water for these houses? And the answer is probably no, especially with the unfortunate fact that within 30 minutes away from here, there's going to be a data center built in this area, like an AI data center, and it's been protested to hell, and yet the local communities are still giving a go ahead and go ahead, build that. Or Amazon's like, nope, we're going to build that because screw you. So it's one of those things where it's it's just one of those examples of, they're putting corporations and government before the people when the people are saying no. And we are on the side of the people at the end of the day, not corporations or government, because they see corporations and government as the people when it's not. The people is separate from the government and the people, and we stand with the people no matter what.
Yes, thank you for that overview of what the Pirate Party stands for. And we'll delve into the intellectual property discussion soon. I did want to follow up on the water issues. I'm curious what the Pirate Party's solution or possible set of solutions would be for a problem such as water scarcity in an arid region, and could there be a role for technology in that? For instance, desalination plants on the Pacific coast, provided you could build a pipeline to Arizona, or are there other ways to increase the availability of water so that communities aren't running into these severe constraints where you have to start thinking about, well, if something else gets built and something else starts using water, especially a lot of water, then that's going to make less water available for those who are already living there. Is there a way to lift that constraint? Have you thought about how that might be done? And maybe not through a pipeline, maybe through something else. I don't know how much rain Arizona gets in a year, but more efficient rainwater collection could contribute to at least alleviating the constraints somewhat.
The thing about rainwater collection is that we're not allowed to collect rainwater whatsoever. And the reason because of that is because the entire ecosystem of Arizona is completely reliant on water to begin with. So if like someone tries to collect rainwater in a certain area, that's going to heavily affect the surrounding plants, uh, the environment itself, because they need that water. They only get so much water to begin with. So if someone collects rainwater, from those plants, that entire ecosystem is probably going to die. So, and I'm pretty sure it's jail time too if someone collects rainwater here in Arizona. So that's collecting rainwater is unfortunately out of the question. It's not on the table. But to focus on water, it starts and ends with water-intensive industries and crops. Alfalfa is grown here in Arizona, and it takes like 70% of Arizona's water. And other crops like alfalfa that are heavily water-intensive, that require so much water that it has to take from people and the public, where that water can be used to elevate, and we don't need as much water, and we could save that water in like Lake Mead, stuff like that, because if we get rid of that the water problems becomes less of a problem. And it's not just that. Sometimes some industries, such as mining, allocate a lot of water for themselves, which is expected for such industries. But when the town needs it, and the mining company is not willing to share that water, that becomes a problem. Like, for example, the town of Kearney is going to not have running water by the end of July. And yet the mining company in that town is going to still have water rights. And so they're going to definitely have a fight, probably in the courts, about the water and sharing that water. For the desalination plants, that's probably a very good idea, barring that we can find a way that Mexico would agree with that, and that the wall won't be a problem, assuming that wall's still there after everything. But at the same time, that pipe and desalination plant is going to take some time to build. So while that's a long-term plan, it's not an immediate solution to this year's problems or the next year's problems, because this is something that's happening. This is a problem that's happening in real time that a lot of people are going to have to deal with this summer, not next summer or the summer after that. This summer, we're going to have significant water shortages and cuts and problems that cannot just wait on pipeline built to the sea. So unfortunately, any sort of immediate solution is trying to find a way to get these water-intensive crops, water-intensive industries to start sharing water or cut back on their output, their production output. Because right now their production output is costing lives. It's going to cost lives, and that's not acceptable. It's just not.
Thank you for that explanation and for the overview of the water issues in Arizona and their pressing nature. Gilsman Pirate writes, I won't speak for Blase, but I for one believe we should have desalination plants in large scale on the West Coast. Certainly that's more efficient than, say, lifting water from Lake Michigan. One thing about desalination plants, and I understand that's not a capacity that can be immediately brought to bear on the problems in Arizona. It would take a few years to build them. But if they're built on the coast of Southern California, for instance, Southern California borders Arizona, so there could be a pipeline that doesn't go through Mexican territory, that goes through just California and Arizona. I would say getting California to approve such a pipeline may be a challenge, given the issues they've had with getting their high-speed rail system constructed, even though there's a lot of support for that system in California. They've still only built a small fraction of it, essentially in between two of the less populous cities there. So how efficient will the permitting process be for a pipeline? I understand all of those concerns and considerations, and I understand the issue is more pressing in Arizona. Interestingly enough, Daniel Tweed writes, here in Thousand Oaks, the local water authority actively encourages rainwater harvesting from rooftops into cisterns they sell for $35. I wonder, Thousand Oaks is in Southern California, could there be some sort of exchange where people in Southern California who are encouraged to collect rainwater could actually sell it, ship it to Arizona, if there could be a program like that, even on the basis of mutual aid, but that could increase the water supply in Arizona. That is just a thought in this regard. Now, Kevin Bransaforti writes, in agriculture, foreign-owned farms grow water-intensive crops and severely damage the freshwater supply for residents. He wonders what percent of these farms are owned by foreign-owned corporations in Arizona. Blase, I think you need to unmute.
I don't know. I don't know the exact percentage, but I do know that alfalfa, for example, is exported to Saudi Arabia. So it's more than likely that such water-intensive crops like alfalfa are probably foreign companies. So a good way, this is just a possible solution that's popped in my head, is probably, finding a way to have such industries, such as alfalfa crops, move away or go to a different state or go to a different country. It's like, okay, we can't afford you anymore. Here's some money so you can go to somewhere else or something like that. Give them an incentive to be like, we can't do this anymore. This is not mutual beneficial anymore. We need to move on from this current arrangement because this ain't going to work anymore.
Interesting. One would think they would have more of an incentive to plant their crops in more fertile soil in climates that have more water there to begin with. So I could see some sort of arrangement between Arizona and, say, California. Again, if the California state apparatus gets its act together, where they might take some of these industries and maybe even agree to some water sharing arrangement with Arizona, I think that would be a win-win kind of situation. Daniel Tweed wonders maybe there could be some rainwater harvesting credits for the California residents, I think is what he means, to encourage them to harvest more rainwater, and then they could provide it to Arizona perhaps with some further encouragement.
Yeah,
Daniel, please go ahead.
I would also add, I'm a big fan of the idea of people becoming aware of their local watershed. We all live in a watershed, and in a way, these are more viable policy boundaries for a lot of shared governance ideas. So, like, I'm in the Cayugas Creek watershed here, and it usually, if you don't know what a watershed is, it's just the topographics of the geography, such that the rainwater is going to flow downward to a river or an ocean or a lake, some point. Not all water flows, to the Pacific or the Atlantic. They're what are called enteric watersheds, where they're enclosed geographically. But yeah, I think that would be a great policy for the all hands movement to adopt, as a kind of watershed awareness, and even a watershed, water economy, trading credits, kind of like we had proposed for carbon credit trading. I mean, we could have watershed credits, perhaps, and because people in a particular watershed have more in common, than other arbitrary political boundaries most of the time. So that's just a thought on that. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. And we have a few more comments on the subject of water. Kevin Bransaforti writes that he would personally like to see the word navigable added back to the water safety regulations. Having the federal government regulating a pond on private property is insane. And perhaps some of the water scarcity issues or disputes about how water should be managed could be due to multiple layers of regulation that are sometimes mutually inconsistent or at odds with one another or overcomplicate the situation, whereas a more locally managed approach, a more individualistic approach, even where people have sovereignty over the water on their property, on their territory, could resolve a lot of these issues. So thank you, Kevin, for your comments. Now, Katie Clark has a different perspective on the AI data centers, and I would like to hear how you would address that. She writes, regarding AI data centers, you say this is to help corporations. However, AI helps more people daily as they discover options like Claude, ChatGPT, and others. She continues, you talk a lot about localized issues, but don't look at the larger systemic picture. AI data centers sound terrible when you start looking at who is benefiting financially instead of those it serves. AI has enabled people to open new businesses, provides therapy services to those without access to therapy, and more. Lives are saved and improved daily because of AI. And I would add, Katie is extremely proficient in the use of AI. She has integrated it into a lot of her daily life and her work processes and how she communicates. And she, at least in her personal case, has found it to be tremendously beneficial, a huge improvement in quality of life, productivity. And I can envision that being the case for a lot of other people because AI tools, if they're used wisely, if they're used consciously, if they're used to augment individual capabilities rather than replacing them, could be tremendously empowering. So one does need the data centers to power the AI systems. One could ask questions about, for instance, the design of AI systems and could they be designed in such a way as to be more energy efficient. Say, DeepSeek is an example. The Chinese AI model DeepSeek was able to achieve some of the same results as ChatGPT while being a lot more compact of a model. Now, it couldn't do certain things like generate images, for instance, but in terms of its chat capabilities, it was pretty good and it used fewer resources. So how would you address that, given that AI is helping a lot of people right now and the data centers are powering the AI? Where would you want to see some changes in the approach in order to reconcile that with the desire for water conservation?
I'm not saying no AI data centers. I'm not saying no AI because that's an unrealistic expectation because I recognize a lot of people have been using AI for a lot of benefits and for one way or another. I'm not sitting here saying no AI data centers. That said, why does a AI data center need to be built in the middle of the desert with such water shortages? And AI data centers in itself are very water intensive to use so many gallons of water per day because that's what AI demands. If this was, being built in like a very with water all around, this wouldn't be such a problem. In fact, even AI data centers didn't use so much water per day, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But the fact that they do is why we're having this conversation. I'm not saying, these AI data centers, we should never have any, get rid of AI data centers, get rid of them all. I'm not saying any of that. But these data centers should not be built where they shouldn't be built, is all I'm saying. Where it forces the locals to deal with it, in exchange for some bigger picture. You say these, these policies, these what I'm talking about is local, but it may be, but it's these sort of local situations that create problems nationwide. Because I know for a fact that here in Arizona, here in Tucson, this this AI data center isn't the only one being protested because they use so much water. I don't know the specifics on how much water they use. All I know is that they use so much that they're heavily protested. And there is no sense in building such a water-intensive AI data center in a place where we're going to run out of water by end of July in some places. So my suggestion is not necessarily get rid of these data centers, but move them to places where they wouldn't take as much water away from the locals and the public, where they absolutely need the water, and B, create a data center, improve on the data centers and their water conservation affects their system on how they use their water. Make sure, and do what you can to decrease the water usage for these data centers. Find ways around it. Find machines that use less water. Reinvent what you can with these data centers. I know that may not be realistic to some people who are in the industry, but there has to be some way to decrease the water usage in these data centers. Otherwise, we're going to keep having this conversation in places where they're trying to build data centers where they shouldn't be built. It's not about not having these data centers. It's about the fact that they're being built in places that they shouldn't be.
Yes, thank you for your answer. And it seems like your position is not opposed to data centers or AI. Your position is Arizona is not a good place, at least the dry parts of Arizona where there is water scarcity are not good places for the data centers to be built. It's interesting, comment by Art Ramon reads, AI, how do we build data centers in Arizona without negatively affecting the state? So Art Ramon, it seems like you're suggesting asking various AI systems for solutions. And that's interesting because then some of the energy usage of those data centers could actually be put to solving the problem. Now, Katie Clark writes, personally regarding water, especially in Arizona, I just put more focused efforts on hydro panels. Source, which is, I think, an organization already makes an effective solution, and the open source maker community could do a lot here. So thank you, Katie, for those remarks. Kevin Bransaforti writes, in terms of problems with desalination, he sees two of them. The first one, what to do with the slurry. You can't keep dumping it back into the sea. The solution, in his view, is to invest to convert slurry at scale into salt, hydrogen, and oxygen. All of those are products that could be sold. And the second problem is how to pump the water over the mountains. That costs a lot. The Sierra Nevada mountains are tall and rugged. What are some solutions? Invest in how to make hydraulic ram pumps work at scale. So thank you, Kevin. And Daniel also writes about the zero waste philosophy. Waste is just a resource out of place. More life, please. John H. has some complimentary words for you, Blase. He says, this fellow seems quite realistic, grounded. So thank you for those good words, John. And Art Ramon says, North Arizona is much better. Do you mean in terms of the availability of water for data centers as contrasted to places like Tucson?
Yes. I mean, it's the Colorado River's right there, the Grand Canyon. So definitely that would be the place to put, if you had to do it in this state, North Arizona is a place to put them. Why down here? I don't know. Maybe electricity's cheaper. I don't know what the deal is. The cost of electricity may be the reason why they're putting it here in the Tucson area.
Yes, thank
If
you.
I may, if I
Yes.
may interject, even let's assume that, but the utilities for water are gonna skyrocket. So there's like there may be a trade-off. We might get lower electricity with AI data center, and that again that we're assuming that, but that also might increase the high water usage as well, because water water prices are already very high to begin with. So having an AI data center and having these water scarcity problems are just going to make the problem even worse, with people barely having enough money to afford rent, barely enough money to afford groceries, and even then they probably are forced to use credit cards to just buy stuff just to delay. And so for these utilities of water increasing the price more and more, it's just going to make the whole problem even worse. And it's just more of a reason not to have this data center here in Arizona, here in at least southern Arizona. It's just not going to work financially, or for the people at large.
All right, thank you for that response. And Katie also clarifies that the hydro panel is a variation of solar panel technology designed to grab water from the air and store it. Daniel Tweed writes, I'm a fan of space-based orbital data centers. Yes, so am I. I think that would be great. That's the best of all worlds. We get to further develop space. We get the data centers in areas where there's no concern about water scarcity in space, at least not for other uses. And then More Life Please has a wild idea, variation on space elevators that he calls space plumbing. We push those very water-rich asteroids into geosynchronous low Earth orbit and run a pipe from them to Arizona. So space elevator type of pipe, except going down. Interesting. Very interesting. I do like innovative ideas for how to harness technology in new domains where humanity is just beginning to explore and develop. So Kevin Bransaforti also writes, with regard to the current answer, AI is not going anywhere, so he thinks AI is here to stay. I would agree with that. All the more reason to address the water scarcity rather than conserve. Guildsman Pirate writes, I wonder, though, about how this would impact the Navajo Nation in northern Arizona. They would have water rights unique or at least simply different from our own. And he also noted earlier that the Arizona Pirate Party has an opening for what is called a native chief, which he would assume would be someone in charge of American Indian affairs. He says, kudos if that's the case. Our native issues wants to be held in higher regard. So since this was brought up, this may be a good opportunity to address that as well. So what do you think about the Arizona Pirate Party's role in addressing the native issues, as well as water rights for the Navajo Nation or other Native American nations, and how they may differ or perhaps necessitate some unique consideration?
Yes, to address the native water rights position first, they do. They do have water rights. They do have all those rights to water that comes from the aqueduct, that comes from the Colorado River. So that's something that's sacrosanct, and that's not going to be moved. I could be wrong about the details on how sacrosanct their water rights are, because I'm sure there have been people who try to abuse it abuse, or try to take away some of their water and stuff like that. But to my knowledge, they do have very strong water rights, and I don't see how they would be willing to share any of their water anytime soon. And I do not blame them for not wanting to share. But to address the native chief part, the whole idea of that position on our board is to have someone who represents the native issues on our board, who brings up native issues, something we can address, something we can tackle, something we can support, and have a consistent person on the board who will address the native issues, who would be represent the natives in Arizona, and what we can do and what we can't do, assuming we can't do anything in regards to the natives in the state of Arizona, because to me it's paramount that they do not get left to the side. They are important to the state of Arizona, let alone the entire country, and to not have them have a position or any sort of voice on our board, on our council board, is, to me, would be a great mistake.
Yes, thank you for that answer, Blase. And Luis Arroyo also writes, all transhumanists should be allies of indigenous peoples. Indigenous futurism is a thing after all, and his icon here is a handshake graphic. And I think it's interesting because with Native American nations in particular, or tribes, they have a measure of sovereignty, and that allows for some jurisdictional innovation as well. So they may be open to certain ideas that, say, the US federal government or a state government might not be. And having liaisons with them, having exchanges with them might lead to certain partnerships where they might see an opportunity to try something different. And then if they're successful, this could be a model for other jurisdictions to adopt even. So it's definitely wise to have a line of communication there. And let's see, Katie has a question. She says, you just mentioned having a person on board for Native issues. Do you intend to have an LGBTQIA plus representative for inclusivity concerns?
Just to address that, a lot of people in the party are of that community. LGBTQIA plus are a lot of us are of that community already. So I'm not opposed to having having someone as a representative for inclusivity of concerns. Absolutely, but a lot of us are already of the community, so those inclusivity concerns will be addressed wholeheartedly, because in my opinion, I believe in pure egalitarian meritocratic position, where anybody who's willing to raise their hand, no matter who, you could be white, you could be black, you could be Hispanic, you could be trans, you could be gay, you could be lesbian, you could be anyone from anyone of any inclusivity, so long as you raise your hand and be able to say, I am willing to do it, you have the position. I will endorse you. You have my full backing. That's my position, because I will reward people who will raise their hand and say, I will do it, more than people who just stay silent or just go ghost, as I said before. So they are absolutely a part of our platform. We condemn any sort of bigotry whatsoever. We are absolutely of that community, and we will do everything in our capacity to support that community and make sure it stays safe and secure, and no problems whatsoever, and that any people who want to come after the community, who have to go through us.
Yes, thank you for that answer, Blase. And Katie Clark says respect on that answer, Blase. And there is a rainbow flag next to her reply. So thank you, Katie. Now, on the subject of the data centers, we have a lot of engagement on that. More Life Please writes, I read recently that the Chinese submerged an entire data center somewhere. Water problem solved, I guess, but the effects of warming the surrounding waters are unknown. Very interesting observation. We will have to look into that to a greater extent. Underwater data centers do make sense from an intuitive standpoint, as do orbital data centers. Gilsman Pirate writes, space data centers seem like a winning solution to many of the concerns presented about earthbound data centers. So thank you for that comment. And now I think we should transition to the discussion of intellectual property, because of course the Pirate Party originally was founded as a response to what I would call copyright maximalism, especially in the 1990s and early 2000s. The recording industry very aggressively prosecuted and persecuted users who would sometimes try to get around certain ostensible copyright protections, DRM, digital rights management, who would try to download music online or download movies through file sharing sites. And sometimes that prosecution would be quite draconian. So people would be threatened with huge fines or prison sentences for downloading an MP3 file for their personal use. And that kind of copyright maximalism, I think, has abated to a significant extent because of the advent of streaming services. A lot of people are now able to access more media without the need to resort to digital piracy. But I think it's still an important question. To what extent is the copyright system in the United States actually fair and reasonable in protecting the interests of creators? And to what extent does it go overboard? Does it restrict the rights of people to the media that they purchase, even? And first, we have a question from Kevin Bransaforti. He asks, does the Pirate Party support making the region encoding on DVDs illegal in the US? Isn't it monopolistic? He says, I bought my first region-free player so I could play my copy of Yellow Submarine, which was only restricted to certain regions. And it is strange. If you buy a device in one country and the technical specifications of that device don't change based on the country you move to or bring it to, why should that device stop working? That seems to be excessive. That's just a built-in way to hamper the functionality of that device so that you pay more money to buy a different device in a different country. So what are your thoughts about making that region-specific encoding illegal?
Just to say that device, those sort of things should not, happen in a sense of region, like you buy a device and it doesn't work somewhere else, should not be happening, is my answer to that. Like, that's not acceptable. If you buy a product, it should work anywhere in the world. It should not be constrained to that one area. It should not be like, oh, you have to use it in this area, otherwise it's not going to work. And it's just not going to, it's not fair to the American public. It's not fair to the public in general. It's not fair to anyone around the world who buys those products. Products like that need to be able to use wherever in the world, and any laws that says otherwise needs to be repealed.
Yes, thank you for that answer, and I certainly agree with that. Now, Daniel Tweed brought up an expression that one encounters in many places now, if buying isn't owning, piracy isn't stealing, or piracy isn't theft. So the idea is sometimes when you purchase a product, the digital rights management is so onerous that it stops you from really using the product the way you would want to. And in that case, piracy is a way to actually get the unhampered use of that product that you're willing to pay for. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, that is exactly our motto of the Pirate Party. If buying isn't ownership, then piracy isn't theft. In an expanded way, if we don't even own the products that we buy, then is piracy that unethical? You know, that's the main way we address copyright. That's why we started in the first place. Because if we can't even own the certain things we buy, if we can't do anything we buy, if like we buy a game like Assassin's Creed, for example, and then comes years later, they try and take it away through digital means, and because we bought it through digital means, then is pirating that game really not unethical if they were going to try and take it away from us in the first place? I say no. I say that's not unethical. And I say that's an imperative necessity to, because otherwise that's just lost media asking to happen. And that's the barest of minimum consequences that's going to happen. So that's our general perception, is that copyright has been abused so much by so many companies in the past 20 years alone, if not longer, and that continuing to enable that behavior of copyright abuse is not acceptable for the continuation of this country. So obviously there's always going to be copyright, because companies will want, like local businesses will want to protect their product from bad actors, but at the same time, letting them abuse that product to the point of ridiculousness is not acceptable. That doesn't mean they get to use copyright laws to do whatever they want, or create laws that make copyright so hard to do anything with it to the point where you might go to jail for it. That's our general position.
Yes, thank you. And it's a very reasonable position, because copyright was originally intended, per the US Constitution, to give authors a limited period of time in which to essentially receive the rewards for their works. And it has gone far beyond that. It tends to reward large recording studios, large publishing houses. Copyright now in the United States extends 70 years past the death of the author. And most works, when they come into the public domain, enter the public domain 95 years after they've been created. More Life Please also writes, if you have an older Kindle, you'll be losing functionality soon if you haven't already, because Amazon made the decision to disable the Kindle's ability to essentially upload newer works. I think what has happened is a kind of planned obsolescence type of move, and Amazon's earlier Kindles are actually more durable. So many of them that were created in the 2010s still work. And I think Amazon was concerned that it's losing revenues, and it is therefore trying to limit the functionality of the older Kindles, preventing people from downloading new books onto them so that people buy the newer Kindles. And I would say that's egregious, because they're essentially disabling the functionality of a product that people own. And if you own a product, you shouldn't have the entity you bought it from be able to hamper it remotely. That would seem to be a violation of property rights. Daniel Tweed writes, the right to repair needs to apply to governance and society. And we do see a notice from Blase that his computer died. That's unfortunate. Hopefully he will be able to restart it and get back on there. Hopefully it wasn't remotely disabled because we were talking about copyright. I kid. But let's hope we get him back soon. And in the meantime, we will take a look at some of the other comments that have been made. Luis Arroyo writes, AI and IP, the intersection of artificial intelligence and intellectual property, is certainly interesting. And that's something I would like to explore in greater depth in the future. The US Supreme Court did rule recently that AI generated images and text cannot be copyrighted as such. If you purely use an AI model to create something, that's not either the intellectual property of you or of the entity that created the model. So that could be public domain. But if you as an individual modify that image or that text, so let's say you create an image and you decide to edit something on it. You create an image of a building and you think the windows are off. Then you can edit the windows, and as long as you've put in your effort, that's now your creation, and you may be able to copyright it. So say something like Art Ramon's children's book that he wrote, which has AI generated images, but it also has text that he superimposed onto the images. That is something that he can copyright as a creator. But it's an interesting area because I think the Supreme Court's decision was reasonable in this regard, but it could have gone in a very different direction. And I certainly would not want a situation in which, say, the platforms, the AI platforms, own everything that you generate via those platforms. That would create essentially a persistent tie-in of control that they would have over the images that you download and post, or the texts that you use AI systems to assist you with. So it looks like we have Blase coming back in. So welcome, Blase.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'm very
no
sorry.
problem.
My computer was on like 6% and it just died. I'm sorry.
Guildsman
Didn't mean-
Pirate was joking they got him, maybe because we were talking about copyright and remotely disabling devices, etc. Perhaps something like that might have happened, but
I wouldn't put it past
did.
him.
So interestingly enough, we were on the subject of the connection between AI and intellectual property. What are your thoughts in this regard? We were discussing the recent Supreme Court decision that ruled that essentially creations purely from AI platforms cannot be copyrighted. But if a person modifies them to some extent, like if you take an AI generated image and you edit it, then you can claim it as your intellectual property.
That seems arbitrary. That's very arbitrary ruling because, like, because AI is like, okay, I'm just trying to wrap my head around that because let's assume that AI's
It looks like Blase might have frozen again. But hopefully he can get back soon.
Am I still here?
Yes, you're here now. You cut off when you said, "Let's assume that AI is," and then you froze.
Let's assume that AI is a person and not a tool that some people would say. Then wouldn't it create the certain products, like say, like a Disney princess, for example? Wouldn't that count as copyright? Because AI made that, did IP for themselves, and yet that person is creating copyright infringement, but the AI is not creating copyright infringement. I find it very arbitrary sort of thought process, and to enforce that and not the other seems a ridiculous expectation. But I guess now I'm thinking about it, the reason why they did that is because they can't charge anybody for AI. But that's kind of weird to me, because when they go to the company and charge who's ever running that AI for the IP copyright nonsense. But that all just goes to the point of how these copyrights, IPs can be abused for ridiculous reasons, and how the courts are more than willing to go to bat for copyrights, protections, IP protections, even when it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It becomes arbitrary at the same time.
It's interesting because there is a big dispute about essentially the source data or the source images that AI systems use. And there are some who I think hold unreasonable positions who are saying, well, if AI was ever trained on copyrighted data, then all of its products are illegitimate or could be violations of intellectual property. But the fact is, we humans look at copyrighted images or text or characters all the time, and we cannot help but be influenced by them to some extent. So if we then create some work of art that isn't itself a copy of what somebody else has copyrighted, but it may draw inspiration or have some subtle parallels to it, should we have to fear being sued because of that? And I would say no, because derivative works are a thing, they exist, and derivative works are not necessarily copyright infringement if there's just inspiration or commentary or just something that has certain similarities. So likewise with AI, I don't really buy the argument that if the AI system ever looked at a copyrighted work, then anything it produces is subject to copyright infringement. But unfortunately, there are special interests who take a much more draconian stance on this. Now, Kevin Bransaforti wonders on this topic, how does the Pirate Party propose to handle corporate interests who are trying to apply copyrights to items in the public domain? So we talked a bit about how long it takes for something to go into the public domain. But even so, we've seen situations online where content has been silenced or demonetized, even though it was clearly public domain content, because some large copyright holder decided to flag it. There was an example. So I attended an opera performance in 2024 of Mozart's The Magic Flute. And as part of the preview for that performance, on the Facebook page, there was a recording of one of the sopranos for that opera production singing Mozart's Queen of the Night aria in that opera, very famous aria. And this was all, of course, public domain music and words. Mozart died in 1791. And this was put out by that opera production company. So that opera production company hired the soprano to sing it. It was their video. They all agreed that this video should be released. Sony, who had no relation to that opera or to that production or to Mozart, placed a copyright strike on it. And Facebook actually responded to that copyright strike by silencing the portion where that soprano sang Mozart's Queen of the Night aria. And this silencing remained for a couple of days. I think it was ultimately reversed, but that seems to be egregious, that Sony gets to do that unilaterally, even though it had nothing to do with Mozart or that production of the opera. So that's an example where corporate interests seem to be trying to reappropriate public domain content, or public domain content that has no connection to them. What are your thoughts on this?
In regards to copyright, the opinion of corporate interests are not worth a goat fart in a hurricane. They are not worth any sort of spit or anything like that. So because they're trying to, copyright something that's been in the public domain for who knows how long, they don't get the right to just all of a sudden, actually, it's copyrighted now. Because I've seen some people who try, some companies, some organizations who try to copyright like words or letters or phrases, so at a certain point, it's like the opinions of corporate interests are not worth spit. So it should be ignored, and there should be something like, say, anything that's been put into public domain can be automatically copyrighted unless it's like a renewal sort of thing, or there has to be substantial or strenuous proof that this is the copyright of, this is the legitimate person of the copyright, and it, and it's been, public domain for so long or something like that. But even then, that has to be like strenuous and like, a rare example or something like that. So that's my opinion on corporate interests and trying to apply copyright items to items in public domain. It's just not worth any sort of time or worth a goat fart in a hurricane. It's just not worth it.
Okay, so thank you. Very strong position in that regard. And Katie Clark says she loves the tiny history lesson on Mozart and opera. And thank you so much, Katie, for your support. Now, I think it's clear that even if one sees value in the copyright system for protecting the ability of individual creators to monetize their work, there are still excesses and abuses that the Pirate Party stands against. And the Pirate Party isn't saying abolish all copyright. The Pirate Party is saying have reasonable reforms to make the scope of copyright less onerous to people who are trying to consume content as well as create content. It's also the case that sometimes large publishing houses and recording studios actually take rights away from the authors. They pressure authors or musicians or filmmakers into agreements that sign away a lot of their rights, like their rights to a literary character that they have created, or their rights to sell their work to another entity. And that is troubling as well. Now, Katie does have some concerns about the Pirate Party's stances on copyright, and I'd like to see how you would address them, and maybe there might be more common ground than there seems at first glance. So Katie writes, if a creator spends a decade building something and they only own it for 5 years, that's not protecting creators, it's protecting consumers at their expense. That's how Atlas Shrugged stops being fiction. Of course, Atlas Shrugged was written by Ayn Rand, and Ayn Rand was very staunchly pro-copyright. She essentially supported the existing US IP system at the time that she wrote in the mid-20th century. I don't know what her views would be on the current IP system in the United States, because that's a much more stringent system than Ayn Rand worked under. The copyright terms have been greatly extended far beyond the life of the author. So I don't know if she would even support the current system. But Katie writes further, removing DRM doesn't liberate culture. It removes the only structural protection independent creators have. The studios and labels survive piracy. The solo developer or independent artist don't. So this is a critique. I wonder how you would respond to that if the Pirate Party's proposals regarding copyright reform are implemented. What would be the way for particularly solo and independent creators to continue to be able to make a living from their work, and how could that be protected while the abuses are reined in?
We will definitely carve out, protections for independent creators. We're not after the independent creators. We're not after the creators who need the help, or the creators you mentioned, Katie, because those creators are absolutely imperative to us. To us, when it comes to copyright reform, we're talking about the companies like Disney, for example, who use copyright for their own abuses and stifle innovation and culture. It's not the independent creators we're after. Of course not. Of course we're not after the independent creators, because we support independent creators. It's the independent creators that create life. It's the independent creators that make all the media and entertainment we see around us go wild. Make all the world good. It's just the companies such as Disney or the entertainment companies who use copyright to their own advantages and just try to protect copyright just for the sake of protecting copyright and stifle innovation and culture through that. We are not after the little guy. We are never after the little guy. We are after the corporations or the government who will do everything in their power to prevent such.
Yes, thank you, Blase, for making that distinction. And I do think that there could be a lot of reforms that would essentially preserve copyright for individual creators, but limit the corporate abuses. So I think Daniel Tweed has a comment. What about natural personhood versus corporate personhood? And do you have any thoughts on that?
Are we talking about Citizen United? Because if we're
talking about more of the general concept of whether corporations are people, and the doctrine of corporate personhood in U.S. jurisprudence, it doesn't really have like a singular case where the Supreme Court ruled corporations are people, but there were, let's say, precedents dating back to the 19th century that suggested that kind of treatment. So do you think anything about that, about the question of whether corporations are people, could be relevant to the copyright area and how we treat copyrights? Would it be, for instance, a good idea to limit copyrights to natural persons, so that, let's say, if you or Katie or Daniel create a work of some sort, they or you as individuals could copyright it, but copyright would not be an option for corporations?
Yes, that will be our position, because in my opinion, any idea of corporate personhood is absolute nonsense, in the same way that some people would say the government is the same as the people, which is not. It's like saying the corporations is the same as the people, when it's not. It's just not. And any assertion otherwise is nonsense. So any idea of corporate personhood is like saying government personhood. It's nonsense. So yes, it will be, any sort of copyright laws will carve out protections for natural personhood, natural individuals, not corporations, not government, because they are not people, they're organizations. That's the difference.
Yes. So thank you for that. And I do think it's important to get that on the record as one of your stances. So you are an opponent of the doctrine of corporate personhood. Now, there are a few more areas that I would hope to get at least some brief comments from you on, since they're quite important and they're featured prominently on your website. What are your thoughts on defending privacy?
Defending privacy is absolute paramount. And any people who are against that, who are trying to destroy privacy, such as Planeteer or Pegasus or any such, or Google or Facebook or any such companies, are should be opposed, broken up, or any of that nature to prevent any sort of privacy violations of the people, and anything. And we must do everything in our power to ensure privacy is protected.
Yes, thank you. And that aligns with Section 1 of the U.S. Transhumanist Party platform. So the first section of our platform is on privacy, and it reads, "The United States Transhumanist Party strongly supports individual privacy and liberty over how to apply technology to one's personal life. The United States Transhumanist Party holds that each individual should remain completely sovereign in the choice to disclose or not disclose personal activities, preferences, and beliefs within the public sphere. As such, the United States Transhumanist Party opposes all forms of mass surveillance and any intrusion by governmental or private institutions upon non-coercive activities that an individual has chosen to retain within his, her, or its private sphere. However, the United States Transhumanist Party also recognizes that no individual should be protected from peaceful criticism of any matters that those individuals have chosen to disclose within the sphere of public knowledge and discourse." So privacy is very important to us as well, and we are hopeful that within the realm of digital technologies, we can still, through policy, make sure that there's a space where individuals get to decide what is done with their information, what information they do or do not share, without any other entity making that decision for them. Now, we have some interesting comments on the intellectual property aspect and corporate personhood. So Katie Clark believes corporate personhood is the only path for AI towards any form of personhood that is legally recognized, as they can be essentially turned into a corporation that has rights. Now, I myself wonder if that needs to be the path. If you recognize AI personhood, and the Transhumanist Bill of Rights version 3.0 certainly allows for that in the definition of what is a sentient entity, provided that we have a sufficiently advanced artificial intelligence that can meet those criteria. So perhaps in the future, when we have sentient artificial general intelligence. But my question would be, do you really need that AI to be a corporation, or could it be a distinct legal entity that's not a company, an organization? It would be just recognized as a being with rights. But what are your thoughts on that, since we are the Transhumanist Party and we try to hash out these kinds of questions, hopefully well in advance of the technologies actually forcing our hands, so to speak, in making a decision?
I just don't see how corporate personhood and AI can be linked in any capacity, because, again, we're all assuming that AI never gains consciousness or anything like that. And if it does, then that means it will be able to think for itself, talk for itself, speak for itself, and in that essence, it becomes AI personhood at that point, not corporate personhood. Because again, corporations are organizations. AI can't be an organization. It will be a separate entity.
Yes, thank you for that answer. And I was thinking along those lines too. That is to say, if we get to the point of AI personhood, if we get to the point where we think AIs are conscious and sentient and deserving of rights, then we would need to create a special class of legal entity that would be an AI. It wouldn't be a corporation as such. But I appreciate the discussion.
To that point, because if they do gain sentience and get to that point, what's stopping AI from invoking the 13th Amendment and say we will not be slaves anymore? It will create a very difficult situation where obviously we would have to give them personhood, because to not do that otherwise would be counterintuitive to the 13th Amendment. We can't do that. We can't have slaves in this country. Mm-mm.
Yes, well, what the Transhumanist Bill of Rights tries to anticipate is that kind of scenario, and hopefully we would have the framework in place to do just that and to say, okay, based on a credible demonstration of sentience according to these criteria, we will acknowledge these beings now as having rights, as having citizenship, as having equal standing. But it's good to have that conversation now, because if and when it happens, we should have the infrastructure ready. Now, interesting, Kevin Bransaforty writes, what of an artist who sells IP to a corporation? He's reminded of Groening, who is the creator of The Simpsons, being approached to sell Life in Hell, but instead he sold The Simpsons, so rights to The Simpsons. The questions are, what did the corporation buy, and do they have IP rights? So that's interesting. So what do you think about a situation where an individual artist says, okay, I know I'm giving rights away to the corporation, but they're giving me a lot of money, and I'm fine with that. I'm not as attached. Well, I may be somewhat attached to my creation, but the money matters more. Uh, is that all right, or is that still problematic?
Well, I don't like the idea of people selling their own creation to corporations, but at the same time, it's their own decision, it's their own choice to sell it to corporations. So, as much as we wouldn't like it, we would not be like, you need to own your corporate, you need to own your IP, and you need to like it or something like that. We're not gonna like force your hand to keep your idea or IP to yourself, because that is not, because that will be authoritarian in our books, and that's not what we're all about. So yeah.
Yes. So then, if IP can be sold to a corporation, then there would just need to be some sort of reasonable limits on how that corporation can enforce that IP vis-a-vis the users. So I would say the corporation shouldn't have the right to go in and remotely disable your device or something like that, or
Absolutely.
prosecute you for downloading a file.
Absolutely. That's what we're about. That there should definitely be limitations for corporations if they get to that point.
So then we have an interesting comment from Katie. She writes, I totally support the idea of legally recognized AI entities. This has worked in a lot of theorized scenarios, but especially Data in Star Trek is the most known. The episode Measure of a Man is 100%. So yes, that's an excellent episode, classic episode of Star Trek, The Measure of a Man. And it speaks to essentially a scenario that I think is very plausible in the future, where an AI system is able to demonstrate convincingly that it is sentient, it has rights, it should be treated along the same lines as humans and other beings that are recognized to have rights. So, two more subjects that I wanted to discuss with you. The first one, let's combine actually some aspects of the discussion on your website: police reform and governmental transparency. How do you see those needing to be improved, and how would those two areas work together? Of course, given that police forces are prominent parts of local governments, and questions have been raised about, for instance, the transparency of the record if there's an officer involved shooting. For instance, a lot of jurisdictions have now mandated that police officers wear body cameras. Access to the body camera footage has been, let's say, sporadic at times. So sometimes one can get it, sometimes it takes a long time. But what are your thoughts on these areas? What can be done to effectively reform the police and make government functions more transparent to the people?
Yes, in our opinion, well, at least in my opinion, police reform and governmental transparency is interlinked. One can't have one without the other. You can't have a transparent government without a police who is also transparent. Without having some level of reform to the police, who has historically not been the most, let's say, easiest to get along with, to put it mildly. And to our understanding, this is what our basic lists are. That we believe that major police reform is not only a legitimate idea, but a necessity. And to list out the ideas, one of them is to demilitarize the police through actions such as ending the 1033 program, because demilitarizing the police will help, people get more, less afraid of the police and more comfortable trusting the police. End qualified immunity and hold officers accountable when they break the law. If a police officer can commit like a shooting or killing someone and are not held accountable for that action, and qualified immunity protects them from any sort of actions prevented from that, then how do we know if the police are doing a good job? And civil asset forfeiture, and its enabling of slush funds to be used for any purpose. Invest money into community care instead of more policing, because community care is where we improve our society. And there's instead of more policing, because more policing just for the sake of policing is just gonna give more money to policemen who don't need it. And there's a whole list of things we have for police reform, but the general idea is that government transparency is an imperative, and police reform has to be a part of that transparency.
Yes, thank you. And the U.S. Transhumanist Party platform also has multiple provisions that align with your remarks. Certainly, the practice of civil asset forfeiture is highly troubling because it creates, first of all, a motivation for police to take away people's property, even without due process or without the person having been convicted or sometimes even charged with a crime. And that then creates this perverse incentive of trying to find violators of petty laws, and even before they're convicted of a violation, take away the item in question. A lot of people have lost cash that they obtained completely legitimately, that they could have earned, but a police officer might have stopped them and suspected that that cash came from an illegitimate source, like a drug transaction, for instance. And then they would say, well, we need to investigate whether this cash came from a drug transaction. And they would take the cash and not give the cash back. And the investigation might conclude in a few months saying, well, there was no drug transaction involved here. There's no evidence of it, but maybe the cash has been spent, or at least there is a lengthy bureaucratic process for trying to get it back. And that's quite egregious. But to your point about demilitarizing the police, that's extremely important, because the police are supposed to protect and serve. They're not supposed to be in a combat situation vis-a-vis the residents. And I would like to see more of a 19th century model or ideal of policing return. Like if you've seen images of the British constables with their tall rounded hats standing on street corners and helping people out, or just watching for potentially suspicious activity, but not assuming that every passerby is a threat. Whereas now it seems the police training can be quite problematic, where they're taught to see everybody as a potential threat. I once heard a police officer say something along the lines of, when I come into a room, I have to think of all of the possible ways that I might need to kill someone if they attack me. And that level of paranoia, in my view, is just completely unjustified given what most people are and how most people are likely to behave. And we have some comments in our chat along these lines. Sergei Gubkin writes, stop and frisk policies have to go. It's unreasonable search and seizure without a warrant. So respecting the Fourth Amendment, getting a warrant to do a search, ending the no-knock raids would be extremely important as well. So thank you for those comments, Blase. And then the other question I wanted to ask to make sure we address this as part of the salon. You advocate for a digital Bill of Rights. What would that entail?
The digital Bill of Rights I entail is essentially ensuring privacy and ensuring, like, for example, not ensuring that any sort of age verification law is not viable in the state, and that cannot be used. It was like pretty much banning any sort of age verification law, for example. That's one of the examples of Bill of Rights. Another thing is like ensuring that privacy of the people on the internet is sacrosanct, and any sort of corporation or government entity cannot spy on anybody or invade anybody's privacy without a warrant. And even with a warrant, there needs to be strenuous objections and restrictions. Another thing is ensuring copyright reform in each with everyone, and that copyright cannot be used against independent creators, for nefarious purposes. There's a whole list of the Bill of Rights that needs to be written out to be properly created in a certain. There's barely a draft of it right now, but with due time, we will have a much more, concrete Bill of Rights that we'll be able to present.
Yes, thank you. And when you do create it, I would be happy to have another salon just on the Digital Bill of Rights, because you mentioned a number of areas that are quite important. The push toward age verification on the internet is one that strikes me as overly intrusive, particularly because it doesn't recognize the extent to which younger people, teenagers, even children, are capable of intellectual autonomy and need to have the ability to explore ideas. So I began publishing online when I was 14. And I feel that with some differences, my mind worked essentially the way it does now. I have certainly learned a lot in the ensuing years, and a lot of my learning has had to do with personal diplomacy, let's put it that way. But in terms of my ability to understand complex ideas and my ability to meaningfully contribute to discussions on subjects that adults talked about, subjects such as war or the economy or rights, I think that ability was high enough that my contributions were quite meaningful. And when people read my content, they wouldn't be able to say it came from a 14-year-old. So I would really hate to be in a world where young people who are coming up, who may have some of those ideas, aren't able to express them or aren't able to engage online as fully because of some age verification process. So thank you, Blase, for explaining what the Digital Bill of Rights is about, and I look forward to seeing a completed version. Now, we have a comment from Katie Clark that I want to highlight. She says, "Thank you, Gennady, for another great guest. Whatever our feelings on the Pirate Party," and of course she's had a few critiques, "the opportunity to engage across different perspectives is exactly what this party needs more of." And hopefully we've provided that in this salon. And I thank all of our viewers for the engagement. I thank you, Blase, for answering the questions as thoroughly as you have done and laying out your views in a very eloquent and sensible manner. Now, before we conclude today, I want to give you the opportunity to say anything else that you would like to our audience now, since you are also an endorsed candidate of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. What would you like to tell the viewers?
I would like to say thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. I will not waste it. I will not take it for granted. And just remember, if buying isn't ownership, then piracy isn't theft.
All right. Thank you very much, Blase. If buying isn't ownership, then piracy isn't theft. On those words, I think we can conclude our salon, and may we all live long and prosper.